The 38th floor of Caldwell Tower smelled like expensive coffee and quiet ambition. Abigail Monroe arrived at 7:15 every morning, 15 minutes before anyone else, because that was simply who she was. She liked the silence of those early minutes. The way the city below still looked soft and unhurried. Before the day swallowed everything whole, she set Ethan Caldwell's coffee on his desk before he arrived. Always black, always at exactly the right temperature, because she had learned that he noticed when it was wrong even. If he never said anything when it was right. She laid out his schedule on the leather notepad he preferred over digital reminders. She confirmed his 9 o'clock call with the Singapore office and moved his 11:30 to accommodate a board member who had asked for an urgent slot. This was Abigail's life. Organized, purposeful, it's entirely centered around making another person's day run without friction. She did not complain about this. She had chosen it, and she was good at it, and the salary paid for Sophie's tuition and the small apartment they shared in the east side of the city, where the rent was manageable and the neighbors were friendly. That was enough. That had always been enough. At 8:47, Abigail sat at her desk outside Ethan's office and pulled out her personal phone. Derek had texted her the night before, asking if she wanted to come to the restaurant after closing. She had gone. The evening had been warm and easy, full of laughter and pasta, and a bottle of red wine that cost more than her grocery budget, but felt worth it. Derek was uncomplicated in a way that Abigail appreciated. He was not the kind of man who made demands or created storms. He simply existed pleasantly in her life, and she in his. She typed quickly, smiling a little as she wrote, "Last night was wonderful. The food was perfect. I keep thinking about how comfortable it felt. I hope we can do it again soon." She hit send without looking up. 3 seconds passed, then her stomach dropped. The message had not gone to Derek Walsh. It had gone to Ethan Caldwell. His name sat directly above Derek's in her recent contacts because she had texted him just the night before to confirm his morning schedule. Her thumb had slipped by less than half an inch, and the most personal thing she had written in months was now sitting in her boss's phone. Abigail stared at the screen. She read the message again. "Last night was wonderful. The food was perfect. I keep thinking about how comfortable it felt." She made a sound that was not quite a word. Her face went from its normal light brown to something closer to the color of her beige desk lamp. She pressed her palm flat against her mouth and looked at the glass wall separating her workspace from Ethan's office. He was already there. He had arrived while she was typing, which meant he had walked past her and she had not even noticed because she was composing a message about how wonderful her evening had been. He was standing at his desk reading something on his tablet, still wearing his coat, and then he went still. Not dramatically still. Ethan Caldwell did not do drama. He simply stopped turning pages and looked at his phone. Abigail watched him read. She saw his jaw tighten. She saw him look up from the phone and stare at nothing for exactly 2 seconds. Then he set the phone down and continued reading his tablet as if nothing had happened. She considered resigning immediately. She considered calling in sick for the rest of the week. She considered the possibility that the floor might open up and absorb her entirely, which was unlikely but felt deeply appealing. His intercom light blinked. "Abigail." His voice gave nothing away. It never did. She stood, smoothed her pencil skirt, picked up her notepad even though she did not need it, and walked to his office door. She knocked twice, even though he had clearly seen her stand up. She opened the door. "Good morning," she said, and her voice came out mostly normal, which she considered a personal triumph. Ethan was seated now, coat removed, looking at her with the same focused expression he used when he was evaluating a quarterly report. Not cold exactly, but careful, measuring. "Your message," he said. Abigail felt the heat climb from her collar to her ears. "It was not meant for you. I am so sorry. I was not paying attention, and your name appears right above his, and I sent it before I realized, and I completely understand if you want to address this formally, or if you feel that it was inappropriate." She stopped. She had been speaking faster than she intended. Ethan looked at her for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was, as he said, "Someone I have been seeing casually, nothing serious. Absolutely not relevant to my work. There was a pause. Something moved across Ethan's face that Abigail could not identify because in 3 years she had not collected enough data on his expressions to read the subtle ones. The obvious ones, like displeasure and focus, she knew well. This one was different. "It's fine," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry." The message. "It's fine. These things happen." Picked up his pen and looked down at the notepad in front of him. "Move the 2 o'clock with Phillips to tomorrow morning. He sent a revised document overnight, and I want more time with it." Abigail stood very still for one more second. Then she wrote the note. "Of course, that's all." She turned to leave. Her hand was on the door handle when he spoke again. "The restaurant he works at, is it good?" She turned slowly. Ethan was still looking at his notepad. "Yes," she said. "It is very good, actually." "What kind of food?" "Italian. Small place on Fletcher Street. He makes everything from scratch." Ethan nodded once, the way he did when he was filing information away. "Good to know." Abigail walked back to her desk and sat down and stared at her computer screen for approximately 90 seconds without seeing anything on it. Then Priya appeared at the edge of her desk with 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall, wearing the expression that meant she had observed something interesting. "That was a long pause before you came out," Priya said. Sitting on the edge of the visitor chair and crossing her ankles, "I accidentally sent Ethan a personal text message about my date last night." Priya's eyes went wide. "How personal?" "Personal enough that I considered quitting," and he said, Abigail picked up the coffee. He said it was fine, and then asked about the restaurant. Priya stared at her. He asked about the restaurant. He asked if it was good. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Abigail, that man has not asked a personal question in the 3 years I have worked here. Not one. He asked about the restaurant. He was probably just being polite. Ethan Caldwell is not polite. He is professional. There is a difference." Priya stood and picked up her own coffee. Something just happened in there. "I am not sure what it is yet, but I am paying close attention." Abigail shook her head and turned back to her screen. She rescheduled the Phillips meeting and sent 3 confirmations for the afternoon and reviewed the notes from the Singapore call and did not think about the way Ethan had gone still when he read her message. She did not think about the way he had asked about the restaurant. She did not think about it at all. She thought about it for the rest of the day. That evening, riding the subway home with Sophie, who had come to meet her for dinner, Abigail stared at the dark window of the train car and watched her own reflection. Sophie was talking about a studio project, and Abigail was nodding in the right places, but her mind kept returning to that moment in the office. Not because she had feelings for Ethan Caldwell. She did not. He was her boss, and he was distant and controlled, and treated human warmth like an inefficiency to be managed. She had accepted that years ago and built her professional life around it without resentment. But something about the way he had said "it's fine" had not sounded like dismissal. It had sounded like the beginning of a question he did not yet know how to ask. "You're not listening," Sophie said. "I am," Abigail said. "What did I just say?" "Studio project. Deadline Friday." Sophie narrowed her eyes. "I said deadline Thursday. What is going on with you?" Abigail looked at her sister, at the dark eyes and the quick smile and the face that still sometimes looked impossibly young to her, and she thought about how much she had sacrificed to make sure that smile stayed intact. She was not going to complicate her job over a misread moment. "Nothing," she said. "Tell me about the project." Oh. Sophie talked, and Abigail listened, and the train carried them both toward home and behind her. In a glass tower above a city that never stopped moving, Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his office well past 9 o'clock and reread a text message that had not been meant for him and could not explain why he could not stop reading it. The following Monday arrived with gray skies and a wind that pushed through the city streets like something with a grudge. Abigail got to the office at her usual time, made the coffee, laid out the schedule, and told herself that last week was simply last week and nothing had changed, and she was a professional woman with responsibilities and a perfectly organized desk. Calendar. Ethan walked in at 8:52. He stopped at her desk, which he never did. He always walked straight through to his office, acknowledged her with a brief nod if she was on the phone, and disappeared behind the glass wall. That was the routine. That was the system. He stopped at her desk. "Good morning," he said. Abigail looked up. "Good morning. The Singapore contract came through overnight. I left notes on the amendments. Can you get the legal team on a call by noon?" "Already scheduled," she said. 11:45. He looked at her notepad, then at her. Something passed across his face again, that same quiet shift she had noticed last week. "Of course it is," he said. And then, before turning away, he added, "Good work." Abigail sat completely still after he disappeared into his office. In 3 years, he had told her when something was wrong. He had never told her when something was right. She had assumed he considered competence its own reward and had made peace with that. "Good work," she wrote it in the margin of her notepad without meaning to, and then felt embarrassed, and covered it with a star that she pretended was a bullet point. Priya materialized at her elbow 20 minutes later. "He said good morning to you. He always says good morning. Says it to the room when he walks in. He said it specifically to you. There is a difference." Priya sat down and pulled her chair close. "Also, he held the elevator for Janet from procurement this morning. Janet has worked here for 6 years, and he has never once held an elevator." She nearly fainted. "People change," Abigail said carefully. "People do not change in for business days, Abigail. Something happened." "Nothing happened. I sent a wrong text, and he was gracious about it, and that is the end of the story." Priya looked at her with the patient expression of someone who knew better and had decided to wait. "Okay," she said agreeably, and went back to her own desk. The changes were small at first, easy to dismiss individually, but together they added up to something undeniable. Ethan began attending the weekly team check-ins instead of sending a delegate. He started learning the names of people in departments he had previously engaged with only through reports. He approved the budget for the staff wellness program that had been sitting on his desk for 4 months without a signature. He showed up to a birthday celebration for one of the junior developers and ate cake and made a joke that was surprisingly funny and left everyone slightly stunned. The office atmosphere shifted like a window being opened in a room that had been sealed for too long. Abigail watched all of it and felt something complicated growing in her chest that she kept firmly pushing back down. 3 weeks after the accidental text, Ethan appeared in her office doorway at 6 in the evening when the floor had mostly emptied. She was finishing the itinerary for his upcoming trip to the company's West Coast office in a city called Harlow, a small coastal city where they were negotiating a significant acquisition deal. "I need you on this trip," he said. She looked up. "The Harlow acquisition. Your analysis in last month's regional meeting was sharper than anything the strategy team produced. I want you in the room." Abigail set her pen down. In 3 years, she had managed his travel, confirmed his hotel preferences, and handled logistics for dozens of trips. She had never been asked to attend one. "I can prepare briefing notes for whoever you take from strategy." "I want you there," he said again. Not with impatience, simply with certainty. The way he said everything, she thought about Sophie, who was fine, who was 21 and capable, and did not need her sister to be present every day. She thought about Priya's face when she told her. She thought about the way the word want had sounded coming out of Ethan Caldwell's mouth when he was not talking.
"Out."
"All right," she said. "When do we leave?" They flew out on a Thursday morning. Abigail had packed professionally, brought 2 backup documents for every primary one, and reminded herself several times on the drive to the airport that this was work. A business trip with her employer, who had recently become slightly more human, but was still fundamentally her employer. The company had a small private plane for executive travel. Abigail had booked it for Ethan dozens of times and never been on it. Walking up the stairs and stepping inside felt genuinely surreal. The seats were cream leather. There were fresh flowers on the small side table. The windows were clean and wide, and the whole thing smelled like sandalwood and possibility. She sat down and ran her fingers along the armrest once, when she thought Ethan was not looking. He was looking. "First time?" he asked, sitting across from her. "First time in something like this," she said honestly. "What do you think?" She considered lying and saying something polished and professional. She did not. "I think it's beautiful. I think most people who ride in something like this probably forget how beautiful it is because they do it all the time, and that seems like a real waste." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "It is a waste." The flight was 2 hours. They worked through the first hour, reviewing acquisition documents and alignment points. Abigail had prepared a competitive analysis that Ethan read with focused attention, occasionally asking questions that were sharp and precise and required equally sharp answers. She had always been able to think quickly when the subject mattered in the second hour. The documents were set aside, and the conversation turned sideways into something more personal, the way conversations sometimes do when you are suspended 30,000 feet above the ground, with nowhere else to be. "How long have you been supporting your sister?" he asked. Abigail looked at him. "You know about Sophie? You mentioned her once." 18 months ago. You asked to leave early for her scholarship interview?" He paused. "I said no." She remembered. She had stayed and sent Sophie a voice message of encouragement from the bathroom. Sophie had gotten the partial scholarship anyway. "It was fine," Abigail said. "She did well." "I should have said yes," said it plainly, without performance. Just a fact he was correcting on the record. "How old were you when your parents died?" 22. Sophie was 17. "That is a great deal to carry at 22. You carry what is in front of you," Abigail said. There was not really another option. Ethan looked out the window at the clouds below them. "I had every advantage, and I still managed to become someone." He did not know the names of people who had worked for him for 6 years. He said it without self-pity, just with the flat, honest tone of someone taking inventory. "That is its own kind of failure. Why did you become like that?" she asked. She had not planned to ask. It came out because the altitude and the leather seats and the absence of office walls dissolved the filter she normally kept carefully in place. He did not seem bothered by the question. "There was a business partner. We built the first version of this company together. He was my closest friend for 8 years. When the company became valuable enough to attract real attention, he sold my proprietary code to a competitor and took a board seat with them. He did it quietly, and I did not see it coming." Abigail said nothing. She let the silence sit. "After that, I decided that closeness was a liability. That the more someone knew about you, the more they had to use against you." He turned back from the window. "It is a reasonable conclusion to draw from the evidence. It is also an extremely lonely way to live, and I did not fully understand that until recently." "What changed recently?" she asked, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. Ethan looked at her steadily. "A text message that was not meant for me." The plane hummed around them. Abigail held his gaze because looking away felt like a retreat she was not willing to make. "Ethan," she said, using his name without the professional buffer for the first time, "I need you to understand that I have built my entire life around this job. Sophie's tuition, our apartment, everything depends on my being here and being good at what I do. I cannot afford to be reckless." "I know that," he said. "I am not asking you to be reckless. I am asking if I can get to know you. That is all I am asking right now." Eh? She breathed out slowly. "You already know me. I know your professional performance. I know your schedule and your filing system and the fact that you take your coffee with 1 sugar and no milk. I do not know who you are." He paused. "I would like to." Outside the window, the clouds broke apart and the coastline of Harlow appeared below them. Green hills dropping down to gray water, small and perfect, like a painting in a frame. Abigail looked at it and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. "Okay," she said softly. "Then ask me things." He asked over the rest of that day and into the evening after the acquisition. Meetings wrapped up successfully, and they found themselves walking along the harbor front with fish. Tacos from a waterfront stand, and the kind of easy tiredness that comes after good hard work. He asked her things. About Sophie and her parents and the flood that had taken them on a Sunday afternoon when Abigail was home studying and they were out buying groceries. About the grief that had come in waves for 2 years before it, settled into something she could carry rather than something that carried her. About the small things that brought her genuine joy, which turned out to be old bookstores, thunderstorms watched from inside, and cooking complicated meals on Sunday mornings when she had no schedule to keep. She asked him things too. About the company he had built from a rented room with 3 employees and 1 idea. About his mother Diane, who called every Sunday and was apparently the only person on earth who could make Ethan Caldwell feel guilty with a single raised. About what he actually wanted from his life, now that he had achieved every professional benchmark he had set for himself and discovered it was not enough. "I want something real," he said, standing at the edge of the harbor with the water dark and shining beneath them. "I have spent 15 years building things that exist in contracts and balance sheets and server farms. I want something that exists in a different way." Abigail looked at him in the light coming off the harbor restaurant behind them. He looked different outside the office, younger somehow, less armored. The precise, careful man who moved through Caldwell Tower like something engineered for efficiency was still there, but something else was visible underneath it. Something that had been waiting a long time to be seen. "You are allowed to want that," she said. "Are you?" he asked quietly. She thought about it honestly, which she had not allowed herself to do in a long time. She had been so focused on surviving, on keeping Sophie steady and the bills paid and the schedule organized, that wanting things for herself had started to feel self-indulgent. Like a luxury she could not justify. "I think I forgot how," she admitted. He reached over and took her hand very carefully, as if she were something he did not want to startle. His hand was warm and certain around hers, and she did not pull away. They stood there for a while without talking, watching the water. And it was the most comfortable silence Abigail had sat inside in years. When they walked back to the hotel, she was aware of everything. The sound of the water, the warmth of his hand, the way he matched his pace to hers without making it obvious, the fact that for the first time in a very long time, she was not thinking about tomorrow's schedule or Sophie's next tuition payment, or whether the Singapore contract amendments were filed correctly. She was simply here in this moment. With this person who had surprised her completely. At the hotel entrance, he stopped. "Abigail," he said. She looked up at him. "Thank you for coming on this trip. Thank you for asking me." He smiled, and it was real, and it reached his eyes. And she filed it away in a place she knew she would return to often. She went upstairs and called Sophie, who demanded every detail, and then shrieked loud enough that Abigail had to hold the phone away from her ear. She fell asleep with the window open and the sound of the harbor below, and something warm and terrifying and wonderful settling in around. Her heart back in the city the next morning. Things between her and Ethan were not the same as they had been before. They were quieter about it, more careful. No announcements, no performance. But the glass wall between their offices felt thinner somehow, more like a window than a barrier. Priya took one look at Abigail's face on Monday morning and put her coffee down with great deliberateness. "Tell me everything," she said. Abigail told her most of it. Priya sat in complete silence for 30 seconds, which was unprecedented. Then she said, "Abigail Monroe, I have watched you hold everything together for 3 years without asking for a single thing for yourself. If you do not take this with both hands, I will never forgive you." Abigail laughed. It came out a little unsteady, but it was real. She was ready, she thought. She was scared and uncertain and aware of every possible way this could go wrong. But she was ready. What she did not yet know was that not everyone was happy about the change. The whispers started on a Tuesday. Abigail heard them, the way you hear weather coming before it arrives. In small signs and shifted atmospheres. A conversation that stopped when she walked into the break room. A look exchanged between 2 women from the accounting department that lasted half a second too long. An email she was copied on that contained, a line of feedback about her recent contributions to the Harlow acquisition that used the word coincidental in a way that was not meant as a compliment. She told herself it did not matter. She had always known this would happen. She and Priya had discussed it before the Harlow trip, before anything had even truly begun. People would talk. People always talked. The only answer was to do her work so brilliantly that the talking had nothing real to hold on to, so she worked. She worked harder than she had in 3 years, which was saying something considerable. She prepared a full market penetration report for the West Coast acquisition that the strategy team had not been asked to produce. She identified a contractual vulnerability in a vendor agreement that saved the company nearly $400,000. She reorganized the executive communication system in a way that reduced response lag by 30% across 3 departments. Ethan noticed all of it. He began including her in meetings she had previously only scheduled for others. He introduced her to visiting partners not as his assistant, but as his strategic coordinator, a title that had not officially existed until he created it quietly through HR1. Wednesday afternoon, without telling her, she found out when her new business cards arrived on her desk. She stood holding one and felt something fill her chest that she did not have an immediate word for. Not gratitude exactly, something larger and more complicated. Something that had to do with being seen after years of being useful. She walked to his office door and knocked. He looked up. She held up the card. He looked back down at his desk as if he had simply confirmed a fact. It was accurate, he said. The old title was not. She stood there another moment, and then she said, "Thank you, Ethan," and he looked up again, and this time the expression on his face was the one she'd been collecting carefully over the past weeks. The one that was warm and certain and entirely unguarded. The one that she was beginning to understand was reserved only for her. "Go back to work," he said, but he was smiling when he said it. She went back to work smiling too. The happiness was real and growing, and she held on to it carefully because something in her had learned young that good things required protection. She did not know yet that the threat was already inside the building. His name was Gerald Whitmore, and he had been on the board of Caldwell Digital for 11 years. He was 61, silver-haired, with the kind of permanent tan that came from spending winters somewhere warm at other people's expense. He had never openly challenged Ethan, but he had also never fully accepted that a man who had built something from nothing deserved to sit at the head of it without older and wealthier hands guiding him. Gerald did not like the changes he was seeing. The warm Ethan, the present Ethan, the Ethan who inspired loyalty in his employees rather than simply commanding their compliance, was harder to manage than the cold, distant version had been. The cold version had been predictable. This new version was motivated by something Gerald could not control, and that made him dangerous. What made it worse was Abigail. Gerald had watched her rise from assistant to strategic coordinator with the careful eyes of someone calculating threats. She was sharp. That much was obvious. Sharper than people had been allowed to realize because Ethan had kept her contained in a support role for 3 years. Now that she was being given real space, her capabilities were becoming visible, and visible capabilities in someone close to the CEO were exactly the kind of influence Gerald liked to eliminate early. He started with something subtle. He requested a formal review of the new coordinator position, questioning whether it had gone through proper board approval channels. He brought it up in a board meeting that Abigail was not present for, framing it as a governance concern. He used words like protocol and process and appropriate oversight, which all sounded reasonable and had the specific intention of making Ethan look like someone letting personal feelings override professional judgment. Ethan shut it down cleanly. The position was within his executive authority. The justification was documented. The performance metrics supported the promotion. Gerald had nothing concrete to hold, and he knew it, so he moved to something less clean. A week later, Abigail received an anonymous message through the internal company feedback system. She almost did not read it. Anonymous feedback was usually either a complaint about the coffee machine or someone venting about parking allocation. She read it because her name was in the subject line. It said that her relationship with the CEO represented a conflict of interest that other employees found demoralizing. It said that her recent promotions undermined trust in the company's merit-based culture. It said that several staff members had discussed filing a formal complaint with the board. She read it 3 times, then she closed the window and sat very still at her desk for several minutes, staring at the city below through the glass. Priya found her like that 20 minutes later. She read the message over Abigail's shoulder, and her expression moved through surprise and then anger and then something quieter and more protective. "This is targeted," Priya said. "Anonymous feedback does not get routed to individuals. Someone with system access did this deliberately." "Does not matter who did it," Abigail said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were flat on the desk in the way they got when she was managing something difficult. "The sentiment is real, even if the delivery is cowardly. People feel this way. Some of them genuinely do."
How some people are.
"Wrong. Some people are wrong, and their feelings are still real, and they still affect the environment I work in every day." She turned to face Priya. "I have been telling myself that doing excellent work would be enough, that results would speak for themselves. But there will always be people who look at me and Ethan and decide the explanation is not my capability." Priya sat down. "So what do you do?" Abigail was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a cloud crossed. In front of the sun, and the light in the office shifted from gold to gray and back again. "Need to talk to him," she said. She waited until the floor had emptied that evening. She knocked on his office door, and when she came in, she closed it behind her, which she rarely did. Ethan read her face immediately. He set down his pen and gave her his full attention. She told him about the message. She watched his expression go still in the way it did when he was containing something strong. She kept her voice level and precise because she needed this conversation to be clear and not emotional, even though she felt it pulling at every seam. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will find out who sent it." "That is not the point," she said. "The point is that they sent it because there is something here to point at. Because we are not imagining what exists between us and other people can see it, and some of them are going to use it against both of us. Let them try, Ethan." She said his name carefully. "I need you to understand what is at stake for me in a way that is different from what is at stake for you. If this goes wrong, if the board moves against the new position, people decide my promotions were personal rather than professional, I lose everything. Not just this job, my credibility. My ability to get another job at this level, Sophie's stability." She paused. "You lose a relationship. I lose a life I have spent years building." The silence that followed was the heaviest one they had sat inside together. Ethan stood and came around the desk and leaned against the front of it, close to where she stood but not touching her. He looked at her with an expression that had none of his usual composure in it, just something honest and a little raw. "Do you want to stop?" he asked. "If that is what you need, I will respect it. It will be the hardest thing I have agreed to in years, but I will respect it." She looked at him, at the man who had started holding elevators for people and learning names and eating birthday cake in hallways, at the man who had held her hand by a harbor and asked her questions no one had thought to ask in years, at the man who had made her business cards with the right title on them without being asked because he had simply looked at her clearly and seen what was accurate. "No," she said, "I do not want to stop. But I need us to do this right. Not hidden and not performed. Right. Tell me what right looks like to you." She took a breath. "It means being transparent with HR about the relationship and letting them apply the standard disclosure process. It means the coordinator position being reviewed by an independent evaluator, so there is documented evidence it was merit-based. It means we stop letting people whisper in corners and we give them facts instead of rumors." He nodded slowly. "And Gerald Whitmore," he said. She looked at him. "You know it was him. I know how he operates. This has his fingerprints on it." Ethan's jaw tightened. He has been trying to find a way to limit my authority on the board for years. This is not about you. You are simply the lever he found. Then we take the lever away, Abigail said. We make it so there is nothing to pull. The process they put in motion over the following 2 weeks was methodical and careful, and entirely Abigail's design. She filed the voluntary relationship disclosure with HR before Ethan did, which established that she had initiated the transparency rather than responding to pressure. The independent evaluation of her coordinator role was conducted by an external firm and produced a report that Priya later described as so thorough it could have made Gerald Whitmore cry. The results documented her market analysis, contributions, the vendor contract savings, the communication system, restructuring, and 3 other initiatives she had implemented quietly, without attaching her name to them because she had not been thinking about credit when she did it. She had simply seen problems and fixed them. When the board received the evaluation report at their next meeting, Gerald attempted to raise his governance concerns again. Ethan let him speak. Then he presented the findings and invited the board to review the documentation and submit any further questions to the external firm directly. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms do when an argument has been removed of all its oxygen. Gerald did not raise the issue again. That evening, Ethan texted her a single line. It is done. She read it, sitting at her kitchen table with Sophie across from her, eating cereal for dinner because neither of them had cooked. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, safe. Not in the fragile way of someone holding things together. In the real way of someone who had built something solid. She texted back, "Thank you for fighting for it." His response came quickly. "Thank you for showing me how." Sophie looked up from her cereal. "You are doing the face." "What face?" "The one you do when something good happens, but you are trying not to seem too happy about it in case it disappears." Sophie pointed her spoon at her. "Stop that. Let it be good." Abigail laughed. It came out full and unguarded, and she let it. 3 months later, the Caldwell Digital Annual Company Gathering took place in the rooftop event space of the tower, the one that looked out over the entire city and had always been used for client entertaining, but had never once been open to staff. That had been Abigail's suggestion, and Ethan had approved it immediately. The whole company was there. All 412 employees, including the night security team and the building, maintenance staff, and the people from the satellite offices who had flown in. There were lights strung between the railings and food from 6 different restaurants and a band, playing something warm and easy in the corner. Abigail stood near the railing watching it all. 400 people in a space that had always been closed to them, laughing and eating and existing in a place that had previously communicated without words that they did not quite belong in it. The change that had started with a wrong text message and a man going still at his desk had moved through this building like something alive. Priya appeared beside her with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You did this," she said. "He did this. You made him capable of doing this. There is a difference." Priya clinked her glass against Abigail's. "I'm very proud of you. Your parents would be very proud of you." Abigail felt the familiar ache of that, the grief that never fully went away but had learned to share space with gratitude. She looked out at the city, at the millions of lights below that were each someone's life, someone's story, someone's ordinary Tuesday. Ethan found her there 10 minutes later. He stood beside her at the railing, and for a moment they simply looked at everything together, the way they had looked at the harbor in Harlow. "Your mother called," she said. "She wants to know if you are bringing someone to Sunday dinner." He looked at her sideways. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I would pass along the message." "Very professional of you." "I am a professional," he smiled. Then he reached over and took her hand the same careful way he had the first time, as if she were something worth being gentle with. "Come to Sunday dinner," he said. She looked at him. At the man she had watched change and had changed alongside. At the man who had looked at her clearly when most people had looked through her. At the man who had held her hand by the water and asked what she wanted and waited for a real answer. "Okay," she said. Below them the city moved and hummed and turned as it always did, indifferent to the small perfect things happening in it. Sophie was downstairs somewhere in the crowd, because Abigail had invited her, and she had come wearing a dress. She had made herself and had already charmed half the engineering department. Priya was dancing with someone from operations. The band was playing something that sounded like it. Had been written for exactly this kind of night. Abigail held Ethan's hand and looked at the lights and let it be good. She had earned this. Not because she had survived hard things, though she had. Not because she had sacrificed for the people she loved, though she had done that too. She had earned it because she had kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept being exactly who she was, even when the environment had not made space for that. And eventually the space had changed to fit her. Some stories begin with a grand gesture. A declaration, a dramatic moment, a choice made in crisis. This one had begun with a wrong name and a contact list, and a thumb that slipped by half an inch, and it had built itself, quietly and carefully and without asking permission, into something neither of them had known they were missing until it was already theirs.